Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's been a relatively quiet week at the state legislature due to the inclement weather. They've been closed, I guess, the last 3 days of the week. However, it's been a busy news week in several other ways. Perhaps most notably is that Russia has invaded Ukraine. And I know many of our listeners are watching that through the news, through social media. I think I speak for my co-host in saying our hearts and prayers go out to those living in Ukraine that are, having to shelter in place or in underground bunkers. I cannot imagine what it would be like to live in a war-torn area.
And our appreciation for our journalists who are on the front lines
Yeah,
reporting on what's going on to make sure that we can stay informed. We value their service and the free press.
yeah. And I think, I'm always amazed at the number of people that I know that have ties to areas like this, right? And in fact, one of our board members, Aaron Harrell, served in Ukraine in 2017. He posted some photos on social media the other day of some of his friends he met there and still stays in touch with. And, certainly was thinking about them. Also here domestically, here in Oklahoma, the news that I think we'll talk about first is that one of Oklahoma's U.S. senators, Jim Inhofe, has announced that he is resigning from the U.S. Senate at the end of this year, just 2 years into his 6-year term. While the state legislature recently changed the law that would permit the governor to appoint a replacement, the timing of his resignation, that is before March 1st in an even numbered year, means that Governor Stitt does not get to appoint someone to fill his space. Instead, a special election will be held this November, and that means that both of Oklahoma's U.S. Senate seats are up for election, with one incumbent being James Lankford seeking reelection, and now this other seat that is essentially wide open, or as wide open as any statewide elected office is in Oklahoma. Joining me to talk about these, and we're going to really walk through the law and all the potential candidates that might pile on to this race, are my two lovely co-hosts, Bailey Perkins Wright. Hello.
Hello, Andy.
And Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
What's up, dude?
What's up? I want to start by saying I am not a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat.
I would also like to add that I am not a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat.
I'm undergoing careful discussions with my family, reviewing all of the responsibilities I have at my personal and work life, and carefully considering whether I should. No, I'm not doing any of that.
It does have a ring to it, though. Senator Nelson.
I would. I will not be. I will not be a candidate for United States Senate in Oklahoma this cycle. And when I say that, you can count on it. It is 100% true. This is not a Mark Wayne Mullen situation.
And we'll get into that in just a minute. Maybe let's start by talking about Senator Inhofe and his legacy. We just looked all this up. He is the fourth oldest member of the U.S. Senate at the ripe old age of 87. And he has famously said, including in 2020, when he ran for re-election, that he would continue to run as long as he could fly his plane upside down. Do you think this means that he's no longer able to fly his plane upside down?
He's often a man to his word. So
I wish that the listeners could see your faces as you struggled with how to answer that.
I mean, he was doing it 2 years ago when he ran for re-election. It was in one of his campaign ads. I don't know if this is that Senator Inhofe no longer has the aviation adventures that he's enjoyed for the last 3 years, whether he's not doing that anymore, whether this is just him saying, hey, I'm kind of tired, I'd like to spend some more time with my family. I don't think that it's a coincidence that he chose this date. I think he chose this date specifically so that Also said, I think he chose the state so that he could make sure that his replacement would be elected in a special election and not by gubernatorial appointment, even for a temporary length of time. Um, um,
Well, and I just want to add before we get into discussion that he's also among the longest serving US senators currently sitting, I'll say, because there's been some that have served way longer than him in the past that are no longer living. But he is among one of the more senior members, not even of age, but even just length of time served. I was 4 years old when Jim Inhofe was elected US Senator of Oklahoma. So this is definitely a huge day for folks like me who've only known, for the most part, in Oklahoma having a US Senator as Jim Inhofe, right? So this is going to be a different era for Oklahoma.
well, and you mentioned legacy, Andy. I think Senator Inhofe has, I think you can certainly have, and there will be differing opinions about what his legacy is, but I certainly don't think you could make the argument that he hasn't been consequential. I think that most people, I think the thing he is probably most famous for is his, I'll call it a stunt where he brought a snowball onto the floor of the United States Senate, ostensibly to prove that it was snowing in Washington D.C. Therefore, climate change must not be real. That's probably the thing that he is most well known for. But he's done a lot of big things. I mean, he has personally ensured that tens of millions of dollars have come back to Oklahoma for various projects. He has helped Oklahoma survive unscathed through several rounds of base closures, bringing new personnel to Tinker, to the bases in Altus, to Fort Sill. He's been really active there. He's the chair of the Armed Services Committee, so he has a lot of authority in that realm. Due to his seniority, he's able to,
Oh,
he's
ranking
able
member
to.
now, but
Yeah, he's the ranking member now, but when the Republicans have had the majority, he's been the chair. He's due to his seniority, he's able to get a lot of things added into bills. He's able to, people talk a lot about the dreaded earmarks. He's been able to use those very effectively. He's had a long career in public service. His longest, obviously, has been in the Senate, but prior to that, he's been in the Congress. He's been mayor of Tulsa. Well, no, I said it. Was he in Congress or just the state legislature?
I don't remember, but I can find
Because he was a 3-term mayor of Tulsa. He ran for governor, I think, once and lost to Bourne, and then I think he also lost to Bourne for the Senate seat initially, but then he won the Senate seat when David Bourne retired.
that's correct. Yeah, he ran for Congress and beat then State Senator Frank Keating in the primary, but he lost to Democrat James Jones in the general in 1976. Yeah. So
well, and
yep.
one other important piece to add to his legacy that has caused controversy for him was defending the election results, right? Senator Inhofe said the 2020 election was legitimate, right? And he
Mhm.
took a lot of flack from his party for having that stance, regardless of how he felt about, the outcome of the election, he did acknowledge that it was fair and secure, right? And so I thought that was a huge part of his legacy that will probably be, controversial among his base.
Even in the last week or so, right? His statements regarding the Russian invasion of Ukraine, his statements in response to some things that former President Trump has said were pretty. I don't know if they're scathing, but probably to Trump they were scathing, right? But he has been, I would say, a staunch defender of election security and of democracy in those ways. So, well, good luck to Senator Inhofe in his waning years. I hope he really gets to spend time with his family and his plane. And
And continue flying that plane.
that's right. Well, this leaves then a big hole in the Oklahoma power structure. I I think we should talk about the speculation that I think everybody has is like, well, who's going to run for his seat? And I think there's a few that we know, there's a few that we don't know yet. And then there's a lot of speculation about others, right? And then there will be others that will probably surprise us as we get closer. Filing isn't until April, right? The middle of April, with the primary in June. However, I expect over the next, I don't know, week or two to see a lot of people pop up, right? And so,
And Andy, all of what we're discussing is all predicated on the timing of his official resignation.
right. Yeah. So I mentioned in the intro that because he resigned before March 1st, this year, it means the governor doesn't get to appoint a successor. And as Scott said this, I think that's significant, right? That tells me that he didn't, even though the legislature just gave Governor Stitt the authority to do that, he uh, he didn't allow the governor to do that. And I think that says something, perhaps, about how Senator Inhofe views Governor Stitt.
Yeah, I don't have any insight into this except to say I don't think it's an accident, right? Like, I don't think this is, just, I don't think it's just coincidence that he's timing this in such a way that it means that the governor won't get to appoint his replacement, even temporarily.
Right. And I don't know if I've said resign. I think he's officially retiring. And he's said that he is projected to resign March 1st.
Well, but he will continue to serve
Right.
in the Congress until January 3rd of 2023, which is when, of course, will be sworn in. So he's going to he'll be in Washington. He'll continue working, and Oklahomans will not be missing a senator for the next several months, which is important. One, because we're supposed to get two, so it's good that we'll have two, and also because as people may or may not be aware, the Senate currently stands at 50-50. It's a 50-50 tie. So it does matter that seat has a bottom in it.
That's right. Every seat matters.
Well, it definitely matters to conservatives to ensure that policies aren't pushed through. So,
Right.
so to maintain that that power, because the number of senators is so close, he had to not have a gap.
Yeah. Well, so we've kind of compiled a list of the names that we've heard or thought of ourselves. You guys just want to go down the list, just take one at a time and kind of go through it and say what we know about that person, then we can discuss whatever else we might add. Sound good?
Yeah. It's kind of going through this. It's really, I'm just going to start. Is that fine?
Yep. Go for it.
So it's funny because, yesterday, we saw this, this news broke yesterday that the senator was going to be retiring, and the three of us immediately started texting, and we had some kind of names that we threw out there of like who we think it's going to be likely, and then who's the senator going to endorse. And then Andy, we both texted some other folks. I'm sure Bailey did too, of kind of asking other people we know that are Oklahoma political aficionados what their thoughts were, and all of us were coming up with really similar names. And then today, or last night, I guess, this morning, Jim Inhofe came out and said who he is endorsing and who is the first official candidate, and it was someone that not only was not on any of our lists, it was someone that none of us had ever even heard of. So the first candidate declared is a guy named Luke Holland. He's currently Senator Inhofe's chief of staff. This is the person that was not on anybody's radar, at least not on ours. He's a young guy, graduated college, late in the late 20 the aughts, I guess is what we call them, right? And started working for the senator at that time, rose up pretty rapidly through his office to become his chief of staff. Senator Inhofe speaks very highly of me at a press conference this morning, where he said that his number one priority as a United States senator will be to fight Joe Biden and socialism, which Joe Biden only has for sure 3 more years in office, and there's not socialism in the U.S. So I guess he's not going to have a whole lot to do as a senator if that's his goal. But he is the first declared candidate, and importantly, he is the one that Senator Inhofe has endorsed. Now, cards on the table. Do I think that is going to be enough for him to be the guy that wins? No, I don't think so. But I do think it's telling that the senator has decided to endorse Mr. Holland, as opposed to some of the more high profile and I think more likely candidates. I could be wrong. It could be that Luke Holland turns out to be a gifted campaigner and captures the hearts and minds of Oklahomans in a way that nobody has since Will Rogers. But we'll see.
It'll be interesting to see if Inhofe puts any money behind his endorsement, right? He has money in the bank in his PAC, and he could transfer that. That would change the dynamic. We'll
I'm sure
see.
that's what that means for sure.
One would think, but I guess we'll find out. Um, I'll go next. So Congressman Markwayne Mullen has not quite yet officially declared. However, the Washington Examiner and Politico are both reporting that sources close to him say that he will run for this seat, and it's expected probably to announce in the next week or so. Uh, Congressman Mullen, of course, somewhat famous because he announced that he was only going to run for 2 terms or 3 terms in Congress. I forget if it's 2 or 3. Either way, he has surpassed that. He said 2, and then he ran for a third. Everyone's like, "Bro, what happened?" And now he's like, "Oh, I'm also running for Senate." It's like, okay, so that just meant nothing. So that'll be interesting. I think this is probably a good acknowledgement point that because Oklahoma has 2 Senate seats, historically one has kind of been for Oklahoma City and one has been kind of for Tulsa, right? There's been like this unexpressed expectation that that Senate seat is held by a Tulsan. That has not been the case always, but I think since Robert S. Kerr was in office, I think so. All right.
Well, and the next person on the projection list is potentially Congressman Kevin Hern. He is among the newest to the political bloc because he is a McDonald's franchisee owner. And so that's where his notoriety and wealth developed. Um, According to Wikipedia, I mean, he bought his first McDonald's in Arkansas and then expanded his businesses into 18 franchises, which gave him his connection to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he serves. And so when Jim Bridenstine left Congress and went to NASA to lead the agency as its administrator, he ran for his seat for Congress, and so that's where his space opened up for him to serve in public service. But it is rumored that he also would consider this run for the open U.S. Senate seat.
Next up, we've got former state representative T.W. Shannon. Mr. Shannon is previously a member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. He was never in the Senate, right? Just the House. He was the Speaker of the House, and
The
I forget how
first
many.
African American Speaker of
That's
the
true.
House in Oklahoma's legislature.
First African American Speaker of the House in Oklahoma legislature. He's been out of the legislature now since like 12 ish, 14.
Because he ran for U.S. Senate when the seat was open after Coburn left and ran for it against Langford.
Absolutely, and was not successful then. But I think a lot of people expect that he's going to try his hand this time. I believe Mr. Shannon is originally from Lawton, and right now
Yes, sir.
he is working. Where's TW work right now? He's
He runs the Chickasaw Bank.
That's what I thought, right? I knew he was doing with one of the tribes. So I think, he's an interesting candidate. I think he would have the potential to be pretty formidable. He's also the chair, I think the national chair of
Blacks
like
for Trump.
Blacks for Trump. Yeah, yeah. I knew that's what it was, but I wanted to make sure I said the name correctly.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't remember the exact name of it. But he's certainly an ally of former President Trump, and that's I think that's going to be. I mean, let's be honest. Like, we'll just say this now. This is going to be a freaking feast of people trying to out Trump each other, right? Like, that's what this is going to be.
Well, and Scott, one thing I'd add to that too is that he's been very vocal doing national press interviews and being one of those essentially talking heads on many of the national programs, right? And so although he has left elected office, he hasn't left the political space, and he's made more of a national presence through his appearances on Fox News and other stations, and then through his active and overt campaigning for past President Donald Trump.
So that's TW Shannon. I think he has not announced yet. No one, as far as I'm aware, has reported that he's going to run. I think there are lots of people kind of in the political space in Oklahoma who will be really surprised if he doesn't ultimately declare and run for the seat. Who's next? Uh-oh.
It's interesting to me about Shannon. One other comment on that is that when he ran for Senate before, he stepped down as Speaker of the State House, right? He was Speaker of the House and stepped down from that. And he was endorsed by Ted Cruz and Sarah Palin in that Senate race. And he still lost to Langford by like 20 points in the primary, which is significant. So next we have State Senate Pro Tem Greg Treat. Senator Treat previously worked for Senator Tom Coburn in the U.S. Senate. He was like field director or chief of staff or something, but it was very, very tight with Coburn. Senator Treat, when Senator Coburn died, he said he's only fears two things in life. It's like God and Tom Coburn, right? So they were very tight. And also Senator Treat's wife, up until just a few months ago, worked for Senator Langford, and then she left. And a lot of folks saw her departure there as perhaps indicative that Treat was intending or expected to have the opportunity to run for Inhofe's seat. And so we'll see that. Senator Treat terms out of the state Senate in 2024. So he's halfway through this last term anyway, and he hasn't made any announcements about what's next. He's a long-term political elected official, and I think this makes a lot of sense for him. The downside, of course, is that he's in Oklahoma City, so he wouldn't be able to claim the geography of the Tulsa seat.
That's true. Well, and the next person that we project to consider entering the race for the open U.S. Senate seat would be current Speaker Charles McCall, who has a traditional path when it comes to engaging in politics. He lives in Atoka and was president of a bank. And he also served in his city's city council. And I believe served in another role as mayor of Atoka as well before running for the legislature. So he's continued to elevate, especially as a leader and champion of rural Oklahoma. And even the dynamics of his role in the legislature has been a champion on rural issues from, perspectives on issues related to schools and other things. And so, but he is projected. So Speaker McCall has been speaker for, I believe, 4 or 5 years now. So 6, I'm sorry. So he's been speaker for 6 years. So we project him to be in the running.
It's interesting because I think he would be a formidable candidate. He has the money, he can raise the money to run, he has the money to run. I don't know, and I don't know the speaker, so I'm this is just speculative. I don't know that he wants to be a U.S. senator. Like, I don't know that that's his end game. Maybe it is. Maybe that's exactly what he wants. He's one that I think he's definitely, it's definitely possible. Of everybody that we have on the list, I think that if Speaker McCall runs, he's the one that I would be the most surprised about, actually. I think he's got to be in the discussion, but I think I would be the most surprised.
Well, and I will say, before you go into the next person, I mean, he's one of the few who bring true rural presence to the race, right? Which would be unique in a way for him to be able to capture a different subset of the voting base who has been very activated, especially after the Trump years, right? And so he definitely could have potential from who he can activate in the base.
I mean, you can't win statewide without real support. And it's interesting because then McCall is from Atoka, right, and has those tribal backgrounds, or tribal relationships, and so does TW Shannon down there. And so that would be splitting some of those supports in potentially interesting ways.
So next up is somebody who I think I'll be really surprised if he doesn't run, and that is current Lieutenant Governor Matt Pinnell. He's in some ways a natural fit for this. I think there's no doubt that he has ambition to continue holding statewide office. He's been lieutenant governor since 2018. He's currently on the ballot to be lieutenant governor for another term. He Yeah, I think he's got a lot of national credentials. He's done a lot of work with Republican Party at the GOP at the national level. Um, I think he would be probably pretty impressive in terms of his ability to fundraise. And yeah, this makes a lot of sense. He's already won statewide office. He's got name recognition. He's got the ambition. Um, I think Matt Pinnell would be a likely and formidable candidate.
Also, he's just super likable, and he's got
Yeah,
that long, deep party
yeah,
connection
yeah,
to the
absolutely.
GOP. Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, he's considered like the brand ambassador of the state. And there's a lot of
He went to 77 counties, got 77 endorsements, and got about 77 votes. So, could get, I mean, yeah, obviously I'm being facetious, but he did not do particularly well in his last campaign for statewide office. And honestly, I think I think he'll run. I don't think he'll fare any better this time around.
and I think there were a number of factors that contributed, right? That I think will still remain in this race, right? There were a lot of people pursuing the open gubernatorial seat, right? We had Mick Cornett, who was projected to do well, and I mean, so when you start having so much factions of the vote, it does make it difficult for people who have certain ties within um, the party sphere in that primary to be able to get ahead. And I think the number of people that were entered into that race made it possible for Governor Stitt to have had that opportunity as a novice in politics. Because also at the same time, we had something mirroring at the federal level with the presidential race. We had a whole lot of folks pursuing office to be president of the United States. And Donald Trump was the candidate that elevated to the top of that ticket as a novice to politics. So I think when you got a whole lot of people running in a race, different candidates have different ties from their experiences and their political knowledge, right? That sometimes make it advantageous for what would traditionally be the underdog to elevate closer to the top.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Uh, Bailey, I know we're gonna have some discussion about this next one. I'll let you lead it off.
Sure. So another person who's projected to potentially run is Governor Kevin Stitt himself, right? Um, Governor Stitt ran for governor of Oklahoma in 2018 when Mary Fallon's seat, when she turned out as governor. As I just mentioned, there was a whole lot of folks trying to pursue that open seat, but there was a culture of people wanting someone who a was a business person, but secondly would do something different in government, right? There was this growing frustration of um, quote unquote career politicians that people wanted to see someone come in and reinvent government. And that was the campaign that Governor Stitt brought to the table, which was very similar and mirrored, the promises that were made by former President Donald Trump, right? And so it's really interesting that from some of the decisions that have been made by Governor Stitt to have national attention over his 4 years in, well, three and a half, I guess, at this point, as governor of the state, right? He hired a DC staffer, right, to have relations there. He's been on national news and has said a lot of things to spark public conversation, right? So, um, but also, and Andy, did you want to lift this piece that he says that he wouldn't run for the seat, but you never know.
Yeah, so I think this is a good point to highlight a couple of things. One, yeah, so Chris Castile in the Oklahoman has a quote from Stitt in which the governor says that he will not be seeking a run for the seat. He says, "My focus continues to be on delivering a top 10 state by working with my friends in the legislature to advance transformational conservative reforms that protect freedoms and benefit all 4 million Oklahomans." Um, which is a lot of buzzwords in one quote. Uh, it doesn't say no that he's not going to run in that quote. Maybe he did prior to that, but he didn't. A classic politician move, right, is to deny without denying, right? So if someone said, "Are you going to run?" He just said, "My focus is on doing this." Well, his focus could be on doing that while in the U.S. Senate, arguably, right?
Well, because he even mentioned months ago about the border crisis, right? And made the trip to the border where Lieutenant Governor Pennell like had to fill in those days, as acting governor. And so he's done a lot of things that point to larger interests beyond serving as governor of Oklahoma and pointing to reforms in his top 10 agenda as things that could be, model for the country. So to your point, Andy, what happens and who will run will just depends on what we see. So people can say, I don't know, I'm not going to at this time, and then may still show up on that ballot. So
Well,
we'll
and I
see.
do think it's interesting. I mean, one, Governor Stitt has said, I think, on a couple of occasions that he intends to run for president in the future, and so that's still hanging out there, right? But secondly, think about the timing here, right? Inhofe resigns, so there's 4 years left on his term, and at the same time, the governor has one more term as governor potentially, right? So if Stitt gets reelected in November, then when his term is up will be also when this seat comes up for election again. So he could potentially run for this seat in 4 years if he doesn't try to run for president in 2 years, and even if he does, for that matter, he could come back and try to run for Senate in four.
Talking about Kevin Stitt running for Senate has given me a migraine. That's fine. That's all it takes anymore. Yeah, I I will be surprised. I think if he does this at this point, I don't know that you can simultaneously campaign for governor and the Senate. So he'd have to drop his campaign for governor, which would create a big hole there. I don't think the governor has ever actually said that he wants to run for president. There have a lot of people who have asked him about that, and he's given the I don't know that he's ever said no. I think he's always said my focus is on 4 million Oklahomans and being the best governor I can, and yada yada yada. There's a lot of speculation that he has his eyes on the White House in the future. I don't think there's any doubt that that's his goal. And so I think I think he's trying to. I think that he would say, what's going to serve that goal better? Another 4 years as governor or running to be in the U.S. Senate. On the plus side, even as a former governor, assuming that he was to win in December, if he ran in 6 years for the Senate seat, he'd be running probably against an incumbent, which is always an uphill climb, even if you're a statewide elected official. So,
And Scott, and even running as a governor for president is still challenging. We've had some in the past, but normally, people have that Congress, US Senate presidential pathway to that office. So
I think the biggest hurdle for Governor Stitt might be, he might have to really contemplate the fact that as a United States senator, you have to show up and vote, and you have to do that quite frequently. Governor Stitt hadn't shown much propensity for voting until he decided to enter politics in 2018. This when he voted for himself was the first time he voted in about 20 years. So someone, if he decides to run, someone should make sure that he knows there's an expectation that you do attend the votes. Our next person and long time listeners of the show will hear that music in the background and say, oh God, can it really be true? I don't know if it's true or not, but you know who's out there is Scott Pruitt. Nothing could stop Scott Pruitt from running for the Senate seat. We haven't heard from Mr. Pruitt in a long time. I think he's a registered lobbyist in Iowa. I don't know what he's up to. I try not to think about it. I think we should not spend too much time on this, and God help us if we have to break out the Pruitt Watch music again after today.
Never say never, Scott. Never say never. All right, so the other person is Gittner Drummond, who is currently running for Attorney General, and so he would have to abandon that. However, he is running against incumbent, quote unquote, incumbent Attorney General John O'Connor, and so having an open seat might be a more appealing. Certainly, it's a higher office than state AG, so I've heard his name thrown around a lot. I think there's always some folks that we're in the question of like, will they abandon their current race and take this opportunity now that it's open?
I think Drummond is interesting because I believe he is somebody that could also self-fund, right, or self-fund to a large degree. Isn't he? Isn't he pretty comfortable?
I know very little about Gittner Drummond, other than his name sounds like a radar.
Even if he can self-fund, if you struggled in an AG's race, then a US Senate race will be pretty challenging, especially one that has a larger lineup of people.
But I think all of these people have enormous egos, so that's. I think you know what I mean. I think you're 100% right, Bailey. But I also think that if you're someone who decides to run for the United States Senate, you're not lacking in self confidence. And so I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people on this list who really are not going to be the next senator from Oklahoma, but I think they might think they're going to be the next senator from Oklahoma. To that end, we've got one more person on our list of potential Republican candidates. Bailey, you want to tell us all about him?
Yeah, so this person is not someone who has shied away from controversy. So Jackson Laymeyer put his name in the hat originally to run against Senator Lankford for his Senate seat. He describes himself, he's a local pastor in the Tulsa metro. He describes himself as a businessman, a conservative who puts America first. And he spends a lot of time on social media and has received national attention for some of the controversial things that he's done. So, for instance, when it came to the pandemic, there was rumor that he was telling people that he would, if they gave basically to his church, that he would help provide documentation to help them get around like I think it was like vaccine requirements maybe or like
Yeah, he said that if you gave a donation to his church, he would sign a letter that
for
was
your
supposed to
religious
get you
exemption.
a religious exemption from vaccine requirement. In the old days we called that selling indulgences, but I don't know.
Well, and then just even when it comes to a lot of far right rhetoric, he ties himself to people to like Michael Flynn and other things that he's brought in for fundraisers and events in the Tulsa metro. He is a person who is a denier about the pandemic, right, and continues to have massive events. And he's a person that makes Senator Lankford seem like a moderate, right? That's how far to the right his politics are. And so currently, he and Nathan Dahm are in the running to challenge Senator Lankford for his seat. But to the point of this conversation, the easier battle, instead of trying to unseat an incumbent, and when you look at the polling data, it says that Senator Langford is still well ahead. But if you read Jackson Leymeyer's Twitter account, you'll see that he thinks he's close into the running. But it gives people a better shot to have an opportunity in an open seat, and also an open seat that has a lot of people running, right? He has the never been in politics before, never served in public service, but has these convictions and ideals that would attract the Trump base, right? And so that would give him a shot in this open Senate seat. So we could see him transition over from running against Langford to now running into the open seat.
All right. Well, we've talked about a lot of Republicans, and there may be others, right, that we don't know about that may file for this seat. Um, of course, it's an open seat, which means that Democrats have a shot of running for a statewide office, not against an incumbent, which is rare, and arguably gives them a better chance at winning than it does against an incumbent because incumbents have an incumbent advantage. So there's a number of Democratic names that are being tossed around, and of course, we will. Go through those as well. Scott, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so the this news came out yesterday, and I started getting some texts. I think Andy, you probably got some texts. Bailey, you might have too. Lots of people saying, "Dude, so is Kinder Horn going to run?" Congresswoman Horn, former Congresswoman Horn, served 2 years representing Oklahoma's 5th congressional district in the United States Congress, losing a very close race to Stephanie Bice in 2020. I think a lot of people see her as a natural fit for this. She's not ever run a statewide race before, so she certainly would have a lot to do in terms of building out that infrastructure. But she has a fundraising network in place. She has a lot of volunteers in place. She's won in Oklahoma as a Democrat, most recently not statewide, but she won. She's the highest profile Democrat to win a race that's outside, the state legislature. So she would be, I think she would be someone that a lot of folks would see as a pretty formidable candidate, despite the fact that she has not run a statewide race before. In terms of whether or not she's going to, she hasn't said. I don't know. So I
But
think
on
that's
Twitter, we did see those eyes that indicated right after the announcement that there could be some consideration, right?
she did put out the side eye. So we'll see. I assume that means she's thinking about it, and if she decides to throw her hat in the ring, I would imagine we'll know about it sooner rather than later.
Well, and Scott, a couple of things I want to add, and not any type of favoritism as my former boss, but Congresswoman Horn um, worked diligently to ensure that she had support from both Republicans and Democrats when she made her run. And I think that's an advantage point, that not only did she have support from both sides of the aisle when it came to like the base, but also like there are people who would give from outside of CD5, right? So she has like donors and supporters in other parts of the state who see her run or saw her time in Congress also as representative of them too, right? So if she were to make that run, it wouldn't be foreign for people in other parts of the state to know her name, but to also be interested in supporting her run. So
100% agree. 100% agree.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think Kendra's probably the best known Democrat statewide right now. Um, Other folks that might consider it, current House Minority Leader Emily Virgin, right, who is terming out this year. Is she terming out this year? I think she is.
yes, yeah, she is.
Um,
I mean, and
so
at this point, she would have nothing to lose to make this run for US Senate, right?
right, yeah. Yeah, so that's an option.
So on our list as well is former Congressman Dan Boren, who comes from a lineage of powerful politicians in Oklahoma, and he also has um, tribal citizenship, which adds another dimension of um, the influence that he continues to have, even his time, being outside of Congress. He served, I believe, 2005 was when he left, if that's correct. So it's been definitely well more than a decade since he's been in the political space. But him not serving doesn't mean that he doesn't continue having the ties and relationships and power that he had as a former congressman.
So he was in office from the second district from 2005 to 2013. So he's got eight years, and he was succeeded by Mark Wayne Mullen. And Dan Boren, Congressman Boren, former Congressman Boren, this is a really interesting one to me. He's got so one, he's from quote unquote the right area, right? Like he's from Tulsa, number one. Number two, he has name recognition statewide because he's from the Boren family political dynasty, right? So his name is instantly recognizable as someone who's associated with a long history in Oklahoma politics, right? Three, he is a Democrat. He is extraordinarily conservative. I think when he was in office, he was rated maybe the most conservative Democrat in the Congress. I think given the current makeup of the Democratic caucus in the Senate, he would be he might out conservative Joe Manchin, in which case you would say, well, then why is he just a Republican? And I would say no. I think if Congressman Boren ran, I think he would be very conservative. I think he would certainly be in some ways a thorn in the side of some of the Democratic leadership. But I don't know this. I think that he would caucus with the Democrats. I think he would support the Democratic agenda on judges and those sorts of things. So he would be a very, very, very conservative Democrat, but a Democrat nonetheless. And so for those reasons, I think that if he could win the primary, I think he would be potentially a formidable general election candidate. I have no idea if he's interested or if he's enjoying life in the private sector.
But Scott, I think if he were to put his name officially on the ballot, that would deter other candidates from running, at least the ones that would have, the greatest likelihood to win, because he has the ability to fundraise at the level that's going to be necessary to win a statewide U.S. Senate seat. He has the relationships across the state from his time as a congressman, but also his family ties, as well as his leadership. I believe in the financial sector. I believe he's in banking as well. And so he has all of the pieces that if there were a Democrat that had a strong likelihood to win, that he has the strongest probability to do it.
Yeah, just for for context, in 2008, Dan Boren was appointed to the board of directors of the National Rifle Association. In November 2009, he was one of 40 Democrats to vote against the Affordable Health Care Act. He was in January 2011. He was one of 3 Democrats to vote with Republican caucus to repeal the ACA. He'd be if he won, I think he'd be a Democrat, but he'd be a conservative Democrat.
Absolutely.
All right. Up next, we've got an interesting name. Now, I feel like it's important sometimes when we throw stuff out there. This is entirely speculative. This is from our brain trusts, and we think this would be interesting. Chuck Hoskin Jr. So if that name sounds familiar to you, he has been in the news a lot lately as it relates to gaming, as it relates to spats with the governor. Mr. Hoskin is the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. He has never run for statewide elected office in Oklahoma, at least not as far as I know. Obviously, though, he would, I think, as a tribal member and a chief of one of the major tribes in Oklahoma, he has a natural base of support there. So he would be a really interesting candidate, I think, and potentially formidable.
Well, and he's also really elevated his profile in the public fight against Governor Stitt on tribal sovereignty and the McGirt ruling, right? And so I think especially because the leadership and the chief and governors in the 5 tribes have elevated a campaign educating the public about the partnerships and impact of tribal nations, right? The billions of dollars that are being put back into Oklahoma's economy, into infrastructure, the job creation, even in the response to COVID, right? When we talk about Oklahoma's ability to distribute vaccines as quickly as we were able to, a lot of that was tied to our tribal nations. And so they have been actively having those public conversations about of those partnerships. And I know that Chief Hoskins Jr. has been at the forefront of not only talking about um, the impact and the leadership that has been provided, but also being willing to stand up and push back. And so we've seen a lot of those public conversations that I think could then translate to larger office in the state level.
Another potential Democratic candidate is former state House Representative Scott Inman.
Or former
He
minority leader.
he was the minority leader. That is correct. And he left in 2018. He termed out in 2018. And since then has worked in banking. He was vice president of lending at First Oklahoma Bank. And then for the last year and a half or so, he's been chief business development officer and VP of commercial banking at Simmons Bank, based here in Oklahoma City. Leader Inman is a fiery debater. Says he was exciting to watch when he was in the state house, and it was widely rumored to be planning a run for governor at that time, and then uh, and
He
then
was. He declared and started
right,
campaigning.
he was campaigning, and then he pulled out of the race. That's right. And so I think he's got some interest. A lot of folks are really passionate about him. He has been a little bit absent from the political field, and I feel like that's when we're making
Because
this.
of controversy, though. A lot of
Yeah,
that was tied to
yeah,
controversy.
yeah, potential rumors of a scandal, right? And when we were making the list of all the potential candidates, coming up with Democrats that might have the statewide name recognition to run for this was a bit difficult. However, I mean, a lot of folks didn't know um, uh, the who Drew Edmondson was before he ran for governor, even though he had been AG. But a lot of folks that were new to politics didn't know that name, uh, despite his family history with politics. So it's not insurmountable, but I think it would be a difficult row to hoe for Leader Edmond.
Yeah, especially because when he was minority leader, he had that momentum, right? Building. And so that does become challenging when something happens, you get put out of the spotlight for a little bit, and then you try to reignite that fire, and that can be an uphill battle. It's not impossible, but it could be uphill.
I think you're both right in everything that you say, but here's what I'll say. I think, and I don't know Leader Inman. I don't know Leader Inman well, um, but but there are I think he would be a pretty formidable candidate. Maybe not. The kind of the rumors and whatnot that preceded his exit from the gubernatorial race, notwithstanding the fact that he has been out of politics for a couple of years, notwithstanding, there are certain people who I think, when it comes to retail politicking, meeting people, getting in a room, shaking their hand, looking them in their eyes, and talking to them. I think there are certain people who are just gifted at that, and I think that there are certain people who are very gifted in their ability to stand up in front of a group of people and just talk. And I think that Leader Emmett is someone who is very talented at both of those things. That doesn't mean that you can win a Senate race in Oklahoma as a Democrat or anywhere else, right? But I think I wouldn't count him out.
I think, though, Scott, that skill matters at when you're running for, I was going to say at the state level, if you were running for a state senate seat, or I would even say like a district area. It's a lot tougher at a statewide level when it really is a money game and a numbers game and having the right messaging afoot. So you can be the strongest person on policy, you can be, a an incredible, orator and all that kind of stuff, and that doesn't get, people over the finish line when it comes to these $1 million races, frankly, right? And so I think that's one challenge. And then also, he's going to be tied with the urban core, right? That's another thing that he's going to have difficulty on, is being able to connect to rural Oklahoma to be able to mobilize them to show up to the polls in a way that's already going to be uphill with Republicans having higher voter registration, right? And so at least like a couple of the other candidates that we've mentioned, at least have ties beyond the metropolitans that could make their campaigning more easier, I'd say.
For sure, for sure. But I'm gonna yes, but your yes, but though. So in 2008, when Jim Inhofe was running for reelection, I was talking to a guy who's been in and around Oklahoma politics for a long, long, long time. Has worked as a lobbyist, has run campaigns, been in campaigns, that knows inside and out. And I was, asking if there was any chance that Senator Inhofe might lose his reelection bid. And he said no, zero. And I said, why? Because he's a Republican? He said, no, it's not because he's a Republican. Now things have changed in the last 14 years, 13 years. I'm the first to admit that. But he said the reason is because, he said, Jim Inhofe won his Senate race because he's got that little plane and he flies around to all the small towns in Oklahoma, and he does that every year. And he can walk into any small town in Oklahoma, and he walks into the diner and he knows the waitress by her first name, and he knows the farmers by their first names, and he asks about their kids, and he asks how they were doing, and he remembers the conversations that they had the last time he was in. So I think you're 100% right. I think that it would be, I mean, let's be honest, it's going to be an uphill climb for any Democrat in the race, no matter what their background or their strength. But I do think that even at the level of even at the level of even at the level of a statewide race, like a senatorial campaign, I do think that your ability to do retail politics and connect with people matters. And I also think that in any race, whether it's a congressional race or a state legislature race or a race for president, I think the one thing that matters more than anything else is your ability to tell a story that people can connect with, right? People vote as much for a vision as they do for a person, especially in higher profile races. And so I I just think Leader Inman tells really good stories. So, that's all. So and again, we have no idea if we have no idea if he's even running. He may not, he may not even run. And if he does, he may fizzle. I think he has a skill set that would serve him really well.
Fair enough. I look forward to finding out. And he was a exciting campaigner to watch. Even if a Democrat doesn't have much of a shot at winning, it might make for a good campaign, which would be good fodder for the podcast, right? All right, so I think we got two left on our list. Is that correct? One is Madison Horn, who is actually currently running for Senator Langford's seat. So this would be similar to Jackson Lahmeyer, right? Someone who was running for one Senate seat that has an incumbent, moving over to one that's an open seat. I don't know that she is planning to do that. Similar to Kendra Horn, no relation. Madison Horn tweeted not quite side eyes, but like a little emoji with the news of Inhofe's resignation on Thursday, and so we'll see what happens. All I know about her is from her social media profiles. She's some kind of cybersecurity expert. I don't really know much else besides that.
I mean, and when we look at the list of people who could potentially run, I think she would have the least likely opportunity to win the race, from very low name recognition, to the ability to fundraise, right, at the level that requires to be able to make those touches around the state to just a number of things. And even touching back to the conversation that we were just talking about moments ago, with even being able to tell a story and cast a vision. When you look at the Republican side, you got a whole list of people, a majority of the folks that we talked about earlier on the pod have that ability, right? Governor Stitt is skilled at crafting a message and telling a story, right? Whether you agree with it or not, he is good at telling you about being a top 10 state and saying that Oklahoma is open for business and all of these different messages, right? And so it will be a competition of values just as much as it is about being able to craft that story and that vision and being able to bring people out. But the last person on our list is a person who's no stranger to the US Senate race. And as of lately, no stranger to current controversy, and that's Abby Broyles. Abby has a background in news as a former K4 journalist. And then she left journalism to go to law school. And after she completed law school, she decided to challenge U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe in his race previously for U.S. Senate. What was like, what, 2 years ago now? That she decided to run. She raised a significant amount of money and was able to build a campaign, but it was not enough to defeat the long-term incumbent that Scott described as the person who could take that plane and make everyone feel in different communities that they know him personally and know them by name, right? That's was going to be an uphill battle even from the beginning when she put her name on that ballot. And so right after that campaign, she launched a initiative called Grit that was focused on activating millennials and youth engagement and voting through digital platforms, and I believe others in the general public, but I think the niche was through the a digital voter engagement. And then most recently, because there's always been rumors about the way that she treats people, whether it's her staff or others. And it came out recently that she berated some teenagers, said a couple of racial things to them, and threw up because of drinking too much with the medication. And then she said, I wasn't there. And then it came out that she was there. And a whole lot of, back and forth with the press who said, listen, we're just reporting the facts and we're reporting what you said, right? And so it's been an interesting battle because someone asked, there's a reporter who asked Abby Broyles, are you going to suspend your run for U.S. For Congress? I'm sorry, because she recently announced within, I would say, the past 8 to 10 months, not quite a year, that she would be running against Congresswoman Stephanie Bice for Congressional District 5's U.S. Representative seat. And with this recent controversy, she was asked would she continue running. She said that right now she's just taking a break from social media, from the attacks. And she, at this time, didn't have plans to not continue running for CD5. Now that this new information about Senator Inhofe not running for reelection, there could be a pivot in the strategy, right? Because even with this controversy and the conversation that's been happening, it's been happening on a national scale. I've had friends from other parts of the country that were sending me links about like, oh, like, what is this about, right? And so sometimes they say that, not like all press isn't bad press, right? So she's had more name recognition as of late. So who's to say that she wouldn't change course and potentially enter into this U.S. Senate race?
That's tough. Yeah, no such thing as bad press unless all of the press is bad. All right. Well, is there anybody else we haven't mentioned yet? Oh, Scott just put in our private chat. I will say two names, right? Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt and Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum. I have not heard those names floated around, presumably because Holt just won re-election like this month, and then and I think is under no auspices that he could win a statewide elected race as a Republican against some of these other names, right?
It will just be really tough in a primary. I
Yeah,
think
right.
if there was a way for Mayor Holt to propel to a general election, I think that gives it a different feel, but it'll be very, very tough for the moderate stance that he has publicly taken and is talking about his approach nationally of leading a city of Democrats, Republican, and independents, right? That's not exactly attractive in a partisan primary. So that would definitely be an uphill battle. So
Yeah, if we had open primaries, right, like a top 2 or top 4 system, I think, someone like Mayor Holt would have a much better shot. And considering he filed bills for open primaries when he was in the state senate, I think he agrees with that. I think similar story for Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum, right? Who I think probably skews a bit more conservative than Mayor Holt. But I also think that because of the need, as we mentioned earlier, to secure the rule vote, it might be tougher for some of these guys to do that because they're from the cities, right? All right. Well, hey, this has been a nice long episode talking through all the possibilities. Listeners, I hope you feel more informed. Bailey, thank you for being here.
of course. Thank you, Andy.
Scott, thank you as well.
It was a delight.
It's a delight. Reminder that next Thursday, March 3rd, is the committee deadline in the state legislature. All bills need to be out of the committee in their chamber of origin by midnight on the 3rd. That means there's a lot of bills they got to hear next week because they didn't hear very many this week. It also could potentially mean, and I say this because I've noticed a few bills that have been reassigned to odd committees, right? Like bills dealing with homelessness being assigned to the Energy Committee, specifically in the Senate. I wonder if this means that they're going to have to like just redisperse bills to other committees to get them heard in order to get them through by the deadline. That comes with its own share of problems and something that those of us who watch how legislation moves will be paying very close attention to. And when we convene next week for our podcast, we'll be talking through what made it and what didn't, but mostly what made it, because those are the ones we're most interested in. Although there's always a few that don't make it that then come back later in session, right? So we'll bring that up next week.
Nothing's ever dead till it's dead.
That's right. Until then, listeners, have a good week. Stay warm. Enjoy the warming temperatures over the next week. And remember, decisions are made by those who show up. See you next week.